Okay, the Water Quality Management Committee meeting Thursday, July 27th, 2017 will come to order. Before we get to the agenda, I'd like to recognize the League of Women Voters Observer Corps person has joined us here, Miriam Cronin.
Yes, nice to meet you all.
Likewise.
Is going to be coming to our meetings and reporting on us at the end of the year.
Right.
So, welcome.
Thank you.
And we have another guest who I don't know.
I'm with the Enterprise.
Oh.
I'm filling for Brittany show.
Okay,
I'm Andrea.
Andrea,
welcome.
likewise.
All right. At the last meeting, we dealt with the initial draft of the Innovative Alternative Septic System Municipal Management Framework. And that's the first item on the agenda for this meeting. We sent around, or Sia sent around, a draft, let's see, dated 7/11/17, which everybody received. I think we have a proposed addition to that draft that has just been distributed now, dated 7/20/17. So why don't we have someone who thought the 7/20 version was better than the 7/11 version, just explain why.
Oh, do you want me to?
You were John, I guess.
John?
No, I'll leave it to you, Steve.
Well, we just thought that the term, the issue is the properties where people might be away, if the property might be unoccupied for one or more months. You obviously don't want to make a measurement during that period because there's nothing flowing. And so it's a question how to define that. And in the 7/11 version, the personal property tax was used to try to define properties that were second homes and so on. But John and I thought that since we'd be reading the water meter every month anyway for other purposes, that was the bottom line on whether the house was using water and creating effluent. And so we put a couple sentences in the middle of paragraph 4.2 that are in blue in the version that John made copies of. Thank you, John. And simply said, basically leaves it up to the management entity to use that information to adjust the schedule to obtain the 6 required readings.
What was the rationale for the 6?
That, we didn't come up with that, the whole committee came up with that, and that was sort of a number pulled out of blue sky. Maybe John?
I think that goes back all the way to discussions with George Hoyfelder and Brian Dudley, that they felt that we needed to have bi-monthly readings for a year in order to be able to establish initially when a system went in that it was meeting the standard. And that after that probation period, then one could back off to once a year.
Well, no, in your proposed modification here, you've got the probation period extending up to 3 years.
But we've had that all along.
Right.
In other words, for a seasonal home, if they were only here 3 months in the summer, we were going to take a couple of readings, and then a couple of readings the next summer, and a couple of readings the next summer, in order to get to the 6 when the house was occupied. So there's no sense taking 6 readings if you're taking a bunch of them in the winter when the house isn't occupied. And it just seemed to us that this was a more straightforward way of dealing with that. And again, it's at the discretion of the guy who's running the program. In other words, we have to have enough confidence in the town guy who's running everything that he's going to be able to use his intuition to say, okay, here's a situation where I'm going to get the best results if I do this. And we've given him enough latitude here that I think he can go back in and get what he needs and get us to a point where the probation period will work for whatever.
Can I make a comment? So I did sort of a text comparison last night and gave this quite a bit of thought, and today, you know, because you've highlighted it, it's easier to see, but it's, you know, its conclusion is the same. And the matter of how to deal with the seasonal properties is a challenge. And you basically had two approaches. One was try and identify the subset that are all seasonal properties, and that's the 7-Eleven version. And then the 720 version basically uses water meter readings. So I see them as two different approaches, okay? And at the moment, I'm going to say they're equally valid, but I'm also going to say that I wanted to think what the challenges were to each of those approaches. So if you do the seasonal properties, you're depending on the assessor's records and that there is a property tax, number one. So it's a step. You have to go through and identify all the ones that are coded that way. And also, not every seasonal property is in fact seasonal. It's rented in the...
That's, I was going to say winter rentals.
There are winter rentals, and so it's quite complicated. So I thought the water meter readings, since they were being done, was actually probably a more valid approach, because it's basically what's the data in the field, and it's not, this doesn't depend on somebody else's program and starred, you know, coded properties. What concerned me about the meter readings was that you said if a property is unoccupied for any months during the probation, so that means 1 month. But many people who are year-round are often not here January or February or March, and so on and so forth. So I thought if you're going to do water meter readings, you actually were too restrictive. So it's...
Can I interrupt a second?
Sure.
But if someone is, well, let me just add that there are also snowbirds of varying percentages, of every possible percentage.
Absolutely.
And in the case that you mentioned of somebody going for a single month, so the water meter says they're not there then, that's not one of the 6 months that year that the RMME uses. They then wait till the next month.
I see.
And that's why we allow them to be contiguous, so we don't tie them in knots.
Okay. Good. Well, and that's by adding the contiguous, which may be contiguous, that's actually a new concept in this document.
I mean, otherwise, if someone was there all 12 months and you're going to do 6, the obvious thing to do is every other month.
Right.
But once you start shooting holes in that by going away for a month, you've got to give them a little freedom to rearrange it.
Right. And the inspector isn't going to know they're away until he arrives and sees that the water meter hasn't changed. That's so anyway, I thought the water meter reading approach would work, and that it was less complicated. And that's sort of my bottom line. In getting this to DEP, the fewer complications that we have, I think the better. So I was okay with the revised language. You made one other change which hasn't been highlighted here, and that is that the original language said if after 1 year the mean or equivalent of nitrogen load, blah, 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 and you wrote if after the probation period the mean or equivalent nitrogen, and I thought that was a good improvement.
It has to
It
be.
has-
Because we
it
give
has to
some
be-
people 3 years.
Because you can have up to 3
Yeah.
years. So that's, you know, thinking this over and the pros and cons, I think that it's a knotty issue.
Yeah.
And I do think, since the water meter readings are being made, that doing this July 20th approach would work. That's my thought.
Right.
Oh, thanks.
Eric. I have a few points. We have to all note that section 4.4 has been deleted, although it's not showing in this printout that we have.
It has been?
Yeah.
They were renumbered. The,
Oh,
No, 4.4, the seasonal properties.
yes.
right.
Goes away.
Exactly,
Right,
goes
yeah,
away.
that's right.
In their revised version.
In the
Right, well,
revised version.
Just so we are
Right.
aware that it doesn't show
Sure,
here.
it's
Shows
the other version.
in the other, but it's not in the,
It's on the last
Well,
page.
it shows here.
oh, I see. Well, okay, right.
But you're right, it's good to
no,
point it out.
I'm just saying that, yeah, it's important. And this sort of replaces that.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Right.
yeah.
So, I think that, as I think about this now, I think that, these are probably important to include. I'm just concerned about muddying the water. I mean, the two things that we're after from DEP with this document. Number one is that they accept some systems can achieve 10 milligrams per liter. That's one. The second is reducing monitoring costs. And this gets to that to some extent. But does it apply to, how does the monitoring work for the non-seasonal? That's really what we're also, that's majority, maybe that's the majority, I don't know, of properties, but maybe not. But how does the non-seasonal reduction, where is that specified in here at this point? In other words, we're trying to cut it down, so, because that's a big burden.
So if you look at the performance monitoring, it does say the compliance system monitoring. Well, it's once something is past probation at 4.2, then it has a compliance system monitoring.
Can you tell them where that is?
Four-
That's 4.3. And 4.3 covers everything, seasonal and everything else. It simply says that if you fall, if you're a seasonal house and you fall, the random number picks you when you're not occupied, you don't get tested. And then by having the September 1 date, it means that if at the end of every time you pick a number by the random generator, it's eliminated from the next year, that you'll get the seasonal ones during the summer.
And the main thing is that this is down to once per year, whereas some time ago, DEP was saying once a month.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I
That-
know.
that's
a
the
huge
main-
reduction.
that's a
That's
huge-
the huge main reduction
Right.
right there.
It's once a year.
So this will be, we've been working on this for some time now, so when they look at this, they're gonna understand it from what's said here, right? It's gonna bounce out, or do we need a picture or some kind of?
They've seen earlier
Brian's
versions.
seen it.
Oh, they've seen it already?
Earlier versions of this, yeah.
Okay. I had another point, but not related to this.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Most of my stuff is minor, and part of it is terminology. I mean, if you want to stick with this section right now. But first, to echo Virginia's comments, water flow is where the rubber meets the road, and that's why using the meter is so important and so simple. That's really what we want to know, is what's flowing through the system. Now, in the new part, we run into a little issue where we have multiple properties on the same system. Right, it says if a property is unoccupied, we've already discussed having 4 condos, for instance, at Treetops on one system. Is that correct? I mean.
Good point.
So I would almost change that phrase, system is property is unoccupied, to if system is not in use. And then that would cover
Yeah.
all of, that would be
Yeah.
broadly applicable across
Yeah, that's a
all
good-
of them.
That's a good one.
Because, and we're also looking at other situations where we might have multiple properties
Absolutely, yeah.
on the same
Mhm.
system. And then the very last sentence in that section, the owner shall be responsible for bringing the system into compliance within 1 year. I would add within 1 year of notification of this exceedance. Because you need some firm starting point for the clock to start ticking on this 1 year period. And if the owner or operator, whatever's been informed by registered mail, hey, your system is out of compliance, you have exactly 12 months to fix it, then for all intents and purposes, a flag has gone up and you can go back later and say, hey, you were told that there's a problem. So I would just add at the end of that, within 1 year of notification of this exceedance. And again, just to keep it loose in that opening sentence in that section, instead of contractor, I would say designee, and that leaves it wide open because may have other systems or maybe other way of operating, rather than just say contractor. So.
What did you suggest, Tom?
Hmm?
What did you suggest?
I
for con-
suggested designee where it says contractor in that first sentence.
I like all three of those ideas. I wrote them down.
Good?
And I think that's it for that paragraph.
Everybody comfortable?
I've got
with
other
this?
stuff in the mix, but.
Okay with it?
Well, you're on a roll, keep going. What else have you got?
You want me to keep, I mean,
Sure.
you want me to go back to the beginning, or?
Any other
Oh,
suggestions you have? These are
well,
pretty good.
everywhere here where we say town, I think it should say municipality.
Right.
Because we have cities and towns, so
Well,
in section one.
We actually don't on the Cape.
We don't on the Cape, but I'm just thinking big picture.
Right.
Ultimate application, let's make it as broadly applicable as we could, because we do use municipality later.
Sure.
But in the first sentence in section one, it says town. And then in section two, it says town's legislative body. And then 3.1 would say municipal incentive grant. And then within that section where it says determined by the town, it would say municipality. Does that make sense to everyone, just to make
Yes.
it as broadly applicable as possible?
Yeah, the word search will
Since
take care of that.
C is not here, I hope Virginia and Steve can be getting all this.
Yeah.
And over in the new section 4 O&M, the first sentence, I would say, in accordance with vendors' current requirements. Because I could picture a situation where a year or two down the line, the designer or whatever thinks says, hey, there's a better way to do this, we can improve performance by this. Or we see a problem developing over time with something that shows up, you really should operate it this way. It'd be the equivalent of an automotive recall notice. A notice would go out. So that would, why I would want to see current.
Now, where's that, Tom?
It's the first
First
sentence in the
sentence.
O&M section.
4.4.
Yeah. So I would just insert current between vendors and requirements. Maybe I'm being optimistic, but I'm thinking, there might be somewhere down the line where people come up with a new and improved way to run it.
Anything else?
Little minor things, commas here and there, I don't know. Do you want to hear about that now, or can I just?
We're not going to take up meeting time with comments.
No, that's why I say I don't
But
think so. I'm
send
leaving-
it to Sia and we'll consider
Yeah,
it.
that's
Right.
minor stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
good. All right.
I think that's it for me.
And those are good. Any other suggestions of, yeah,
Ron, you go ahead.
I was just going to move that we accept it with the 720 version with all of these good suggestions that everybody's made.
well, we may have more,
Oh,
so.
go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to come back again to section 4.7C. Again, just as Tom has mentioned, this document is more broadly applicable across Massachusetts, it would be. And therefore, when we talk about the Sentinel Station for the estuary meeting, I mean, if we look at the Chestertown example, where their focus is not on estuaries, and a lot of towns in Massachusetts don't have estuaries, they have lakes or they've got groundwater, and the groundwater in many may be used for drinking purposes. So, so it seems to me that this is narrowly limiting this to estuaries and not to groundwater, drinking water supplies, or other surface water, fresh surface water. So I think we can eliminate that, and because it brings in a whole other dimension to meeting a TMDL, which is not really maybe pertinent to this document per se. There's another issue with total maximum daily load of nitrogen loading that is a broader, somewhat more complex issue. So my feeling is that unless you want to put in every single option for groundwater quality, other surface water quality, whatever it may be.
Can I counter that? I think by,
Sure.
it says may, and again, getting back to the issue, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? This Sentinel station is going to tell us if it's working on a large area basis. I'd suggest leaving it in. It's just one more option that people would have available, and we can point at it and say, look, even though some of these other numbers are weird, the real number that we really care about, which is what's happening in the estuary, is better, or it's meeting the standards.
That's true, and it could be meeting the standards because of some other activity
Exactly,
we've
that we don't
undertaken.
know, but we can finally say, hey, we don't exactly understand what's happening, but we know that we're getting where we want to be right now. I'm just, since it says may, it's one more option, and it may be when other people look at it, they'll think of other ways of looking at this.
But maybe it should just say that, meeting water quality standards.
Right,
Whatever it may
it could
be,
be.
if it's estuaries or groundwater,
Right.
whatever it might be, instead of.
I agree,
spaces.
it is very focused, and it's peculiar to us in the
Yeah.
coastal area.
Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So you just want to say the surface water Sentinel Station, meeting and maintaining?
But it's also groundwater though. I mean,
Well-
drinking water sometimes comes from groundwater.
I agree with Tom. I
No,
mean,
we're not, or
the-
ground.
Another way of addressing Ron's concern would be not to drop C, but you could, in principle, add another line to cover other water quality measurements, but then it brings up the issue, are we, I'm not sure who we're writing this. I thought we were writing this for the town of Falmouth, but there's some thoughts that we're writing it for all of Massachusetts.
We're
I
saying
mean,
we're
there's
writing
got to
it
be a
for
little
all of
work done by the
Barnstable
other
County.
towns to adapt it to themselves, it would seem.
Right.
Unless it, well, I vaguely remember hearing that we're being paid by some grant to come up with a model
Right.
document.
That's right. This is a model
That's a
document.
good
You
point.
need to think
In
of the water.
that, in that case, I think Ron's point is valid, but not to solve it by getting rid of C, but adding E,
Or other appropriate
which is
measures.
other appropriate measures.
So the
Yeah.
But you
title
want to
should be
make sure,
At the end, it just say reducing alternative Fort Falmouth?
No,
No, no.
it's not Falmouth.
Well, what
It's-
is then?
it's
Is
municipality.
it Pittsfield? Is it Greenfield? Is it, what is it? It
we're,
doesn't say anything specifically anywhere that it's Falmouth, or even coastal towns.
I think you were on a
Worcester.
track for a
Yeah.
solution which had to do with changing the wording of C. So the implication here is meeting particular standards.
Right.
And I didn't quite catch your words, but instead of monitoring results for total nitrogen, which specifically is, we're thinking TMDL, maybe you want monitoring results for applicable water quality standards or something like that, that's general.
Yeah, I think, if I could speak, Eric. Yeah, I think we could drop estuary, and
Estuary,
as Virginia said, put in
estuary isn't there.
values, nitrogen concentration values at appropriate monitoring stations, or something to that effect, but it's a good point. And estuaries does make it tightly focused, and of course, that's where we started here, right, with the
That's
estuary.
where we still are. We're not
Right.
doing anything else.
Right, but at the same time, if we're gonna put the thought into this, my feeling is, let's have something as broadly applicable as what we.
well, then another way of doing C is to flip it around and start with the general. I'm thinking out loud, it won't be
Yeah.
perfect the first time. But maintaining the mandated water standards, for example, the Sentinel Station for the relevant
Yeah.
estuary. And then you can have other examples if people want to put them in there.
Yeah, this is a place for us to say, here's some options, some
But
good ways to do this.
I don't mind broadening it, but I think that the Sentinel Station should be left in to make it
Okay, so why-
really clear that that's one of them.
Why don't we add another one that's
But-
broader?
Yeah.
But with groundwater, do they have sentinel stations, or is that just
No.
an issue?
No.
It would be
That's-
impossible to, there's so much variability in groundwater
Yeah.
Yeah,
nitrogen concentrations.
Right.
You could never develop one Sentinel well that would
Right.
tell you
Right.
whether you're improving.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
This
the
is all
sentinel
about
sta-
surface water quality,
I
right?
totally agree with that.
Yeah.
So, but
And
in
if you-
Chestertown, that's what their focus is. Even though they're a coastal community,
Right.
and they do have estuaries, but their focus is actually on groundwater there for whatever reason. And other towns don't have estuaries,
Right.
and they don't have a sentinel stations. We happen to have,
Well, their focus is groundwater, because they all had wells right next to the groundwater.
right,
And nobody in Massachusetts has this issue
Yeah.
that we know of. And
but other towns will have a different,
Well, for those towns with the wells, there'd be presumably some statistical limit on the number of failed wells or something like that, right?
It's when the groundwater begins to reach 10 parts per million nitrate, nitrogen, and usually, for instance, the Cape Cod Commission already has a standard, that if the groundwater in the
But Matt's
the
point
area
is where?
is,
Groundwater where?
it's obviously multiple points over a general area, and I completely agree it's variable. But when the calculated density of the number of houses reaches 5 milligrams per liter of nitrate, nitrogen, that triggers Cape Cod Commission review. So there already is regulatory focus, you might say, on groundwater issues. So there are standards out there, I think is the
Right.
point I'm making.
Just getting back on and re-emphasizing Steve's point, that this concept of a sentinel station is a really important one because it's broadly integrative. It looks at the inputs in the whole watershed for that particular body of water. And of course, ultimately, it's what we care about because that's where we see the problem. And I think this idea of a sentinel station should be retained. And later on, if some town wants to drop it, for whatever reason, they could, but I think it's.
How about maintaining the mandated environmental standards such as maximum nitrogen concentration at the sentinel station in the corresponding estuary?
Wasn't Ron's issue, isn't the issue here that estuary implies coastal and that we want this to be broadly applicable to?
Such as?
if it isn't coastal, it isn't really relevant to anything we're doing.
we could say, I mean, that
Well,
would be, you get
well,
that
the
gives
issue
a
being-
broader thing, but it's,
Is this just for coastal towns?
Yeah.
I think we're beating a dead horse.
I think so.
Let's
think-
leave the damn thing the way it is.
Yeah, I think so too. Since we've got may in there, let's just, let's say maybe any of the following.
Somebody
And-
else wants to change it.
And we could add E that says, or other appropriate measures as determined,
It's
And then leave it
it's
wide
F,
open.
right?
right?
Isn't
No,
E, E is pumping rate.
They're working off of the 720 version.
Ah, sorry. Yeah, it says E, pumping records. So if you're gonna add,
No, we're down here.
oh, I beg your pardon. Beg your pardon.
Okay, well, do we have a motion?
Steve started one, I think.
Well, no, I was going to give Ron the chance if you wanted to.
yeah, you know, well, I would
You
go
have
with
other-
Steve's language, I think, I don't have any other points, I would just,
Okay.
for this, I would use Steve's language, saying such as sentinel stations. or
Okay,
estuaries.
Steve, could you put that one out again?
Well, all of these suggestions have been non-contentious, except for the last one. Except for this last one, I could just make a motion that we accept it with all of these good suggestions. But I'm not sure what the consensus here is on this last consensus, so I guess
Separate motion for
Yeah,
that.
we-
that would be an amendment or a separate
Right.
motion. or something.
Right, okay.
So I'll make the motion
You'll make the-
without that.
Move and second without it, and then we'll see if there's any amendments being
Yes,
proposed,
okay.
okay? We
So
have a
I move
motion
that
and
it-
a second.
I second.
Seconded to adopt as amended by the previous conversation. Are there any amendments to be offered?
I would say, I would just follow Steve's language, which is, start with maintaining the mandated nitrogen concentration for municipal waters, comma, such as that at the Sentinel Station for estuaries.
So you'd be deleting C and replacing it with,
With that, yeah.
With that?
That's- Yeah.
You'd
It's
be
really-
changing C.
It's a reworking of C.
Reworking of C, yeah, which is what I thought Steve's recommendation was good, so it's,
all right,
Maintaining the mandated
Mandated.
nitrogen concentration for municipal waters
yeah.
such as,
That of the Sentinel stations for estuaries, something like that.
okay. Sounds all right.
I don't understand that.
I mean,
Such as the
Such
Sentinel
as.
I
Station.
think the grammar
Okay,
has to be
okay.
worked out by someone in a quiet place.
Yes, yes.
Okay,
7 people shouldn't be doing this.
anyway, well, since I'm sort of the secretary here. Maintaining the mandated nitrogen concentration for municipal waters, such as the Sentinel Station for estuaries. That's what I'm going to put.
Okay.
Is that what your motion
right.
is? Okay, we got a motion. Do I hear a second on that one? I'll second it. All right.
Yeah, second.
Discussion? You okay with it? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Very good. Okay, now we're back to the main motion, which is Steve's that adopted the earlier suggestions of several members. All in favor of that one?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I direct a comment to our audience? You're looking at a bunch of frustrated copy editors.
Right.
Be grateful.
You're just lucky you didn't have to hear about the commas.
This was actually a good day.
Yes, this only took half an hour. Okay.
There's not much else to do.
All right. So the second item on the agenda is something that was once again sent around. I think everyone had a copy of this from Sia earlier in the week. Preliminary cost to homeowners, a comparison of IAs and sewers. Now, this is obviously relevant only to Oyster Pond because we've been working with the Wright-Pierce table. But-
Maybe you should give a little background.
Yes.
Just so the audience and the,
Right, okay.
know what we're talking about, including what IAs are.
All right, yes. This committee's charge from the very beginning was to look at sewers, and more importantly, to look at alternatives to sewers, and to cost them out, and to test their applicability to our estuaries, see what works and what it costs. So we've been doing that, and more recently, we've been doing that specifically to compare the cost of sewering versus the cost of an enhanced IA septic system. We've put 20 enhanced IA septic systems in the ground in West Falmouth Harbor, so we have actually real-life, real-time examples of what they cost to put in, what they cost to operate. And so with that information, and with the sewering information, in this case, strictly talking about Oyster Pond, the numbers that our consultant has put together on that, we've got a table here of costs to the homeowner for each choice here. If you were to do sewering, what it would cost them prospectively, and if you were to put in enhanced IA systems, what it would cost them. So that's what this table is. And if Sia were here, it would be up on the screen, but
Yeah.
she's on Vineyard Sound in a boat. So,
Eric, just to continue that, this is meant to go into which report of Wright-Pierce's? In other words, this is an insert into their,
Alternatives analysis, I think.
into their,
Right,
alternatives analysis, yes.
right.
Okay. So we can go through it line by line and sort of talk about how these numbers were reached and what their shortcomings are, because every number that we have has some estimates and some guesses.
Eric, I think I have a way I can express this fairly succinctly if you want me to.
Do it.
Basically mainly as a result of the document that we were just talking about, and the anticipation that DEP will accept that and the reduced amount of monitoring, we're enabled to reduce the cost of the IAs to about 3/4 of the cost of the sewer, 34 or something.
For installation.
For installation, the capital cost. And then if you look at the operation cost, the typical O&M for the IAs came up with $735, and an annual sewer bill of $540, or I should say, or an annual sewer bill of $540. So those are in the same ballpark. And then you make various assumptions about financing, about interest rate being either 0% or 2%, 20 or 30 years, and you come up with a bottom line to the homeowner with the total annual cost, if it's 0% interest, and I guess 30 years, yes, of $1,662 for the sewer, or $1,547 for the IAs. The IAs are lower, but it's really close. It's not as though they've reduced the cost by a factor of 2, let alone 10, or something dramatic. But they're viable economically.
Now, there are some huge assumptions involved here in the financing piece. And one of them is that IAs can be financed by borrowing money at 0% interest.
That's an assumption.
That's a huge assumption.
We don't know that.
As of this date, we don't have any reason to know that to be true. It's an assumption that we could borrow the money from the state revolving fund and then pass that 0% rate on to the homeowner.
We could move back a couple of lines in this table, though, before we get that far down, and that is the betterment for IAs. Is that, do we know that can happen? Do we know we can, we have a 70% house owner, 30% betterment, well, 70% betterment, but is that something that, is that in the law?
It's already been
I've
done
only
for
seen
the,
sewers
it's
in the
been
law.
done for the grinder pumps in Little Pond.
Right. There was
No,
no,
grinder
legal-
pumps were-
it's legally the same,
grinder
I
pumps
think.
were paid for entirely by the town.
Right.
Right, that's how you do it.
the 70/30, Virginia can explain.
Well, that's 100%
then. Because it was done in North Falmouth, it was done in, this is the 70/30.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the sewer system, though.
Right.
But it's
Right.
by a vote of town meeting.
Well, but it's by a vote of town meeting, and so it could just as easily apply to Oyster Pond or any other sewer system, any other wastewater project that has a collection system.
So
You
once
can
a
apply to
project
oysters?
was
Oh, it has to have a
proposed,
collection system.
Yeah,
once a project was proposed, we would take it to town meeting and
Absolutely.
ask town meeting
Yeah.
if they would be willing to contribute 30% of the cost of the project.
Right.
Which they did in North Falmouth and which they did in the
Yeah, but
Heights
that
of
was,
Buena
a-
Vista.
but that's its own, that's a sewer system thing.
Right, and the
North
premise
Falmouth.
here is because this is an alternative to
Wastewater.
a sewer system, that the same argument
No,
would apply.
well, right. I'm just saying, it's,
No,
it's uncertain, it's
of
not
course.
certain, yeah, it's not, there's no comment to the side of that saying that at the pleasure of town meeting.
Right.
Well, right, it's an assumption.
It's also built into this whole piece of work that we've been chewing over for the last two meetings, which is section 3.1, the town incentive grant.
Yeah.
That,
right.
Right.
And any place that the town has a wastewater improvement project, there will be town meeting action because you have to vote a service area, sewer service area or IA service area. There will be a boundary of what properties are in and what properties are out. That's how the Betterment Act works. So absolutely, town meeting would be involved, and the history that goes back to the 1950s is that the split has been 70% to the homeowner and 30% to the
Also,
town.
I think that the importance here is the relative values.
Yes.
Nobody should go away, and it shouldn't be published that the homeowners will be paying $1,547. I mean, there's no way
Right.
that number is
These are
firm at this
guesses.
point. The point is that the two numbers are close, regardless of the interest rate.
Right.
If it is 2%, then it's 2,200 versus 2,500.
Right.
No one should think, oh, where am I going to get that extra $300 from? It's that they're in the same ballpark, and the IAs seem to be a little cheaper if you compare apples to apples.
Well, okay, well, if we could, all right. I've got more things
Sure.
on the, okay. Because I don't know where some of these numbers came from, right? I mean, the annual operation and maintenance cost for the enhanced IA septic optimistic B is $735. Now, does that include equipment replacement and, you know, because, you know, usually the warranties I've seen are like 5 years. So is it that, you know, if it fails, then the homeowner's gonna have to replace after a warranty period? I mean, I don't know how the costing was kind of done. All I see is $735. I don't know how that was put in. And I assume it includes electricity and whatnot. but-
No, it doesn't.
It
And
does?
So it included pumping, the maintenance contract, and the monitoring.
Okay.
And I don't,
I think it had electricity.
no, I don't think it did. Well,
Well,
look,
this is a fair question then.
I just
we
don't know.
had that
Yeah.
worksheet.
Yeah, table 5.9.
Table 5.9 applies to something else. That applies to the total cost, I think.
Wasn't
Well, at
there-
least they apply it there to the total cost. I have 5.9 here, so. But anyway, that's one thing. The other thing is too that, maybe Eric can answer this, because of your op-ed piece in the newspaper about getting rid of the turbines, that we have an electricity cost that will probably be estimated like $10 million over how many years. But according to Ray Jack, a number of years ago, the sewer bills will go up without the turbines, because that cost has to be covered now. So, so I don't know how much more, if the 540 says based on current, but I'm not sure exactly how that applies to the future and what that figure may become, if they do actually disappear in the end, which it seems like they will be.
Well, no one has any idea. Right, the 540 is how much the average sewer bill is
Yeah.
currently for the
Right,
people who have
but they know
sewers.
how much electricity they're using, and they can divide that, at least based on the systems that we have in place now. But I don't know if that's been factored in. I just don't know.
How could it be? Yeah.
And
As you say, nobody knows.
in the same way.
Well, everybody knows. They know clearly.
The electricity used to run a grinder pump and the electricity used to run your IA system aren't figured in either of those costs.
But that's a homeowner's,
Those are on the homeowner. And so if you're looking at this operation and maintenance cost here, those electrical charges are not in there.
well, grinder pump we know is about $50 a year, based on the
Yeah.
thousands of them out there. So, but we don't know about the other, operating the pumping stations and the facility. 75% of the cost, the electricity cost, is moving the stuff to the plant in the past. With Little Pond, I don't know what it'll be. And 25% was operating the plant. They know these things. So the total cost to operate the system, I think, for electricity, is pretty well understood. So if there's going to be a difference now, then, you know, that helps out with the IA systems if it's going to go up. Okay, that's one thing, you know, because if that's higher. The IA systems won't be impacted because that cost would be as it is. So, so this is something that we could check on. I think that I'm sure that the DPW knows has an idea. I know Ray Jack has a pretty good idea. He's mentioned in other meetings that would be the case. Now, how much it would be, if it's $10 or what, I don't know what it is, or more.
I think we're drifting away from what we're trying to do. This is simply a table to go in our alternatives analysis that gives us a rough idea of the relative costs of sewering or using IAs. And what this table is telling us is that we're within the ballpark. Neither one of these systems has an obvious capital cost advantage at this point. And we can go back and forth and nitpick about it, but I think the table makes its point, and I'm not sure that
Well,
by
it may be-
fumbling around with it,
Right.
we're gonna,
Makes a point, but it may be misleading too. If, for example, that the sewer system, we can get the 0% as the town has gotten, whether we can get that same for the other systems, I don't know.
A very good question. We don't know.
So it could be that the sewer could be 1662, as it says here, and the IA could be 2214.
True.
I mean, that's a big difference. So it's just a point. There are unknowns here, and it looks like, you know, apples to apples. We've got one with 0%, got the other one at 0%. We got the sewer at 0%, we got it at, and the IA at 0%. But it may not be that that's possible, or it may be whatever, and that the other is 2%. Because if someone has to borrow money to upgrade their regular septic system, they're gonna, whatever the market is, or how, if they have to get it from the county, it's very expensive, but if they can find it through a home equity loan, that could be something else. But this is comparing things that may not be real. And that's just, there should be some note made.
Well, that's why there's two separate lines, one for 0%, one for 2%, because we understand.
Right, but we don't know.
0% may not be applicable in all
So-
cases, and it may.
Eric, can I just?
Sure.
So there's a very simple fix. In Wright Pierce's alternative analysis, they can put in, when they look at the line item for betterments, they can say, this will require an approval of town meeting.
Okay, good, okay.
And the same thing we can put in a little caveat about, this is based on current sewer rates, which may be adjusted in the future. And then the others, we can say that, there's a history of getting zero interest loan from the state revolving loan program for sewers. It's not certain whether we can do the same thing for IAs, and that covers it.
Right, well,
And could I just jump in at this point? And the introduction to this table in the report should say, these are planning numbers. This is a planning exercise to give people a sense of what the costs might be. It's not possible to be specific at this point, but you need some sort of planning effort, which this has been, to get some kind of comparison to arrive at the conclusion that Steve just articulated a little while ago, is that they're more or less in the ballpark, they're more or less equivalent in terms of
In
cost.
fact, taking a little risk in saying this, but the real value of this is to inform the big picture thinking. It's the whole point of this whole multi-year exercise is to reduce the $610 million that was thought for sewers. Now, yes, shellfish, inlet widening, PRBs are going to have an impact. But I was wrongly thinking intuitively that IAs would have a huge impact. Now, these numbers are in a watershed where sewers are actually at a disadvantage because of the big distances between properties. So in other watersheds, they'd come out cheaper. So this isn't a method to knock 300 million off of 610 million, let alone to knock 500 million off of 600 million.
As a trained financial analyst, and having put together hundreds of these tables, okay, in my career, there's always a list of footnotes after anything like this.
As John has just
John.
suggested, we will
Yeah,
have.
and I think that those are some, but even for the investment cost at the top,
Yeah.
what is the assumption for the IA? Is it cluster, like 4 or 5 properties, or is it individual households? What is that number for?
If you look at Table 9, I think 5.9, you'll find out what they assumed. If not,
It
we'll.
says dwelling unit,
It's a dwelling unit, yeah.
which doesn't sound like cluster.
So it could be that it's less costly even
Right,
than
right.
what's there. So, I mean, there could even be a range.
Right.
You could say, you could have another line, you could say
Yeah.
cluster versus
Oh, yeah.
individual or whatever.
Yeah,
or
no,
dwelling.
I tend to agree that we ought to have more detail for our own purposes, if nothing else, than what this has. This was just designed to have a conversation about, so that we knew where we were going a little bit, and where the soft spots were, and where the unknown
Well,
uncertainties were.
and another point that isn't in here, and it's not anybody's fault, is that if we do want to start seriously knocking down the cost, we have to take a page from Walmart. You have to have serious competitive quantity pricing on the IA.
True.
The sewers are not going to come down. That's an established industry. The IAs are practically a brand-new industry in terms of quantity. And if people get orders for hundreds or thousands, they will sharpen their pencils.
Yes.
And that will make a bigger difference than any presence or absence of electrical bills, so.
Well, on that point, the grinder pumps,
Right.
if you were to buy a grinder pump, I think off the shelf, it was like $3,500, and then when the town bought the 700 of them, it went to $2,500, or whatever it was. It was some
Yes,
huge
some major
difference,
reduction, absolutely.
when it went from an individual purchase to a town purchase.
Right, and they get a longer warranty, they get a lot of good things because they bought a lot of them.
Right, right.
So, okay, so this was more for discussion, it doesn't require a vote, and it does require some more background information, which we will come around with.
I'll do minutes, and I'll try and include the various suggestions for the different kinds of footnotes
Beautiful.
as a way to start, and then the working group can produce another iteration of this.
Okay. Any further discussion on this one? Okay, report of members and staff. I have one quick report. The East Falmouth Village Association had a meeting last Tuesday, this week. I went, and Brian Howes went. Brian produced a handout of what was going on at Mill Pond, gave a nice little talk about what his people were doing out there. I think the people who were at the meeting were happy to hear it and happy to know the detail that they're going into on this project. So,
Can we get a copy of that handout?
Yes.
yeah.
Great.
Why
Oh,
don't,
this is what, Mill Pond?
Mill Pond, right.
We'll ask Sia to scan it.
Scan
and
it,
Send
we'll
it to
send it to you.
everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Has anybody driven by there lately and had a look?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
It's
You
it's
can
like
walk on
covered.
it.
You
right?
can
Go
walk on
yeah,
it, so
yeah,
it looks
yeah,
like
yeah. No, it's
all
like,
solid green again.
I was,
Okay.
oh, okay, now I know what they're talking about. Because when we were there for the meeting, went out, it was pretty clear, it was just,
That
you
was
know.
September.
I know, it was, right.
Yeah. Any other reports of members and staff?
Does that include questions? Are questions allowed? As well as report? Oh, no, this is a partial report. It's becoming apparent in the case of Oyster Pond that periodically dredging the lagoon, seriously dredging it, is going to be important to get the saline level back up in Oyster Pond, based on John Ramsey's model for it. And OPED happens to be having their annual meeting tonight, and I'm supposed to tell them what's going on here. Is it fair, is it reasonable to assume that I mean, Chuck Martinson has been extremely cooperative with us and so on, and has optimized things as best he could with his budget for dredging to permit the herring to go in and out and so on, and facilitate the sailing. Is there any possibility of a town meeting action or whatever is required to get additional funding so that dredging could be done seriously, say, this coming winter? And thereafter, I mean, in other words, in advance of the CWMP?
It so happens I've been investigating the budgets for dredging, both offshore and inlets, relative to the work being done on Bourne's Pond. There are two line items in the annual budget that apply to dredging, and they're both under the supervision of the Division of Marine and Environmental Sciences. And we have already talked about kicking up those amounts. So that's where this question or proposal that's the pigeonhole that it belongs to. The offshore dredging budget is already going to be increased at the fall town meeting. It's usually done in the capital outlay article. And the inlets is under consideration at this point. So I think it would be important for Oyster Pond to ask Martinson specifically make an estimate as to what you need in terms of dredging, and then have that submitted to Jennifer Petit when they do the budget assembling, which is done in the fall. So now is a timely time
Thank
to
you.
discuss that.
And it does, of course, apply to other estuaries too, such
Yes,
as
absolutely.
Salt Pond and
Yeah, it's a general budget. It's-
even, what's the pond right down behind the building here?
Oh, Sitter's Pond,
Sitter's Pond.
called Fresh
Fresh
River.
Pond.
Yes.
Right, Ron?
I was just gonna say, I mean, this is, even though this cost is going up, I mean, it translates into beach nourishment, doesn't it? I mean, isn't that like a savings on that side or something?
Depending on what
Theirs
gets
doesn't.
stretched. Theirs is like mayonnaise.
No, theirs is not,
It's
right,
terrible,
no.
Terrible.
Terrible
Terrible
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah.
But, and it's, just continuing this a little bit, has John or anyone else modeled what happens to the saline water after it gets into the pond? Has it work been done? Because in the absence of any mixing in that pond, you're gonna end up with Sitter's Pond, which you have a wedge of saline, completely meromictic situation where it's never gonna mix. And my fear is if you add more salt to the system, you're gonna decrease the volume of fresh water floating on top and eventually end up.
That's a very good question. There was a model done by John Ramsey,
Yeah.
his former company, and I
Right.
can send you that if you want it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it because I don't see, it's too sheltered there for wind mixing, right? Salt
Right.
Pond is
There is-
wide open and it's
There's
mixed.
a little wind mixing, but it's very complicated. There is a
Yeah.
lower layer with much higher salinity.
Right, that's what
And-
I see happening.
I don't understand how you do that, the diffusion and the mixing and so on.
Yeah, I'd like to see
And
that.
I don't know that, I'm not sure that
Wait
they
for a
do.
hurricane.
but-
How does the pond look now? I haven't been over there lately. Is it good?
The pond looks good, the lagoon is getting better, but there's a chronic problem, and it seems obvious to me that the lagoon has been sort of the septic tank for the pond. I mean, I shouldn't say, that makes it sound like there's human waste in it or something, and there isn't. But
There's your headline.
No field trips today.
But it collects all the dead eelgrass. and so on,
Yeah, sure.
and becomes physically blocked. And it needs a serious dredging.
So, Steve, if you would send me that report,
Yeah.
I'd like to see it.
Virginia?
I have two things. One is the Bournes Pond permitting process. The Conservation Commission closed its hearing and issued an order of conditions, and that process went very smoothly. There's always a 21-day appeal period. On the 21st day, an abutter appealed, basically concerned about transport of sand and whether his downdrift beach would be affected. So it's now into a legal process, and that's the latest I know. The other announcement is that before our next meeting, which is the end of August, there's going to be a DEP meeting that refers to the draft TMDLs for the estuaries, Rands, Canal, Megansett, Fiddler's Cove, and it's going to be at the Herman Room on August 23rd at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay. But
Oh, August 23rd.
this meeting is about the SMAS report or the
No.
DEP report?
It's the DEP report after they have reviewed the SMAST report. So it's in their regulatory process. It's their meeting in their regulatory process after they have looked through the report, then they come to certain conclusions, and they're now presenting that publicly, and there's a public comment period.
They're basically adopting the TMDLs that the MEP report recommended for those three water bodies years ago.
Okay, so they're not putting in they're not accepting one where the benthos becomes a sink thing or
I
whatever?
don't know, actually. I don't know exactly what they're going to present.
Okay.
Shall I can forward this?
Yeah, no,
announcement?
if we could get some kind of, a document that says what.
They have a document, and we'll ship it around if you
Yeah,
want it.
that'd be good.
Because once I saw that the TMDLs were the same as the ones we've been working with, I didn't worry about it
Oh,
anymore.
I see, so they're the same as the original.
Precisely the
SMAS.
same, not a
Okay.
tenth of a point different.
Okay, okay.
So it's,
Okay, yeah, just, all right.
right, something they think they have to do.
Right. Okay.
Any other reports of members and
Just one thing, I just want to suggest that everyone become, sort of very familiar with the open meeting law in terms of communications, just so that we're sure that in terms of how we can distribute information and things like this among ourselves. But it's just documents, it's no comments on them, just basically do that kind of thing. And that's important, because I think in the past, there have been little discussions that took off through email and a little bit, so I think it's.
I'm sure we can count on you to point them out when they occur.
Well,
Right, but it didn't happen with the revisions that were provided today, that they were just sent on the IA protocol.
Well-
Unless you're referring to that.
Ron might be referring to my email, but I did give justifications for the version we sent out, but I think we made those clear at the meeting today, so, I mean, there were no responses to them. So,
Right, as there shouldn't have been.
right,
Right.
but I mean.
Yeah.
But even that should have been, to send the document is one thing, but to comment on it is something else.
Duly noted.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Minutes of the prior meeting. Everybody seen them?
Yep.
Any additions or corrections? Motion to approve?
Seconded.
Additions, corrections? All in favor of the motion, signify by
Yeah.
saying aye. Aye,
Okay.
opposed, we got it. The next meeting is August,
29.
well, now, is it the 31st or the 24th?
No, we made it the last Tuesday.
Last-
Tuesday. No,
I'm sorry.
Thursday.
I meant to say.
okay, that would be the 31st.
Well, one thing on that meeting, we should get a report from DMES, from the Department of Marine Environmental Services, about if the oysters are still alive in Bourne's Pond.
Good point.
Yeah, right, we should
Right.
get a report, so.
And what they taste like.
No, we won't get, no, they're not, well, actually, Bourne's Pond is open, I think. They're still
Yes, I think
fishing.
it is.
Right.
Okay.
But they're too small, they're below
That'd
the
be perfect.
illegal, they're illegal. They might
We'll,
be
we'll mechanically decalcify them.
August 31st.
Well, okay, this is a good question. Now, there's 3 Thursdays in August.
Ooh,
3 or 5?
5 maybe.
Well, 3 that we're concerned with.
Ah.
The 3rd, the 17th, and the 31st.
31st.
So, do we want to do this?
You had said the 31st.
31st, okay, we're all,
I'll be locked in the 31st.
we're all sticking to the 31st.
And what time?
8:30 a.m.
8:30 again. okay.
AM, everybody good with the AM?
Yep.
Yep.
John, you remember? Got it?
I've got it programmed into my small brain.
8:30 AM.
Like the open meeting law.
Same time, same place. All right. Did we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Second,
Discussion.
voted.
All in favor? Aye.
Man.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Yeah.